The comic book industry has been in a very rough place over the past few years, and unfortunately, it's not getting better anytime soon. But now the Rippaverse scribe Chuck Dixon is slamming the comic book industry's ideological pandering to female readers. I have a few different things that I want to show off, but before we get into the topic, if you enjoy the content I create, check out the links in the description, follow me on social media, and consider supporting through Patreon or via YouTube memberships. Now, I talk a lot about topics like this, about, pandering to female readers because, of course, I am a female, and I definitely think that this is happening. It is unfortunate, but these creatives, I don't even want to call them that, but the creatives that work at DC and Marvel, they do not actually know what female readers want, and they are creating the worst content possible that absolutely nobody is reading. And then instead of just accepting, hey, we clearly do not understand what this audience wants, they double and triple down and say that it's your fault that it's not being read, you're ist, you're a phobe, you're pushing females away, all of these crazy things. And it's just sad to see, because as a woman who has loved reading comics in the past and still does, even if it's not from, the mainstream creators or the mainstream companies, it is sad to see, my gender being used as some kind of big sign. Like, hey, females, come read this. Like, if I wanted to read it, it does not matter if it's led by females or written by females. It just has to be a good story with good characters and you'll draw me in. But they think that women are so dumb that all we see is women and then we're gonna buy it. Like, that's just not gonna happen, and it's clearly not happening. It says, in taking aim at one of the most self-destructive yet common editorial problems of his prior employers, former Big Two and current Rippaverse author Chuck has pushed back against the mainstream comic book industry's ongoing, tired attempt to bring in female readers. The Alpha Core writer offered his thoughts while speaking to his artistic collaborator. Therein, at one point during their discussion of his first comic for the Rippaverse, he raised his frustrations with how the current comic book industry has abandoned its key male demographic, asserting to his guests, something else we've talked about is that it's always been a male-centric, or it's been an industry where it's been driven by male readers for boys. However, before Smith could continue, Dixon playfully interrupted, not always, before explaining in the 50s and 60s it was girls buying the comic book market. And this is true. Archie Young Romance sold 3.5 million copies a month for years, elaborated the Punisher writer. You also had lots of romance titles. You had Archie, and girls were reading regular comics too. They were reading Lil Lulu and Uncle Scrooge and Green Lantern. My sisters read Green Lantern because they thought Hal Jordan was cute. I completely agree. I mean, obviously I grew up in the 2000s, but it was the same for me. While I did love reading, the more romance-centric stories, I love a good Batman and Catwoman story, don't get me wrong. I also just want to read the content that was targeted towards boys. I wanted to read that, and I still do, simply because it is fantastic writing, and you have such deep characters with so much backstory and so much lore, and they're not just like these one-dimensional figures and all they have going for them is their gender. And that's what's sad about current comic books. They are writing comics for people who aren't reading them, and the women who had love for, the MCU and comics like me don't care just about female-centric teams or poorly written characters that are only being highlighted because of their gender, like the Marvels. The females who already watched the MCU films or read the comics don't care about these, hollow attempts to bring us in. It's just not gonna happen. Third wave feminists' big mistake is that they believe there's never been comics written for women or targeting women, but there's been plenty. Instead of writing that stuff, they're just mutilating the comics that were targeted towards boys that the women who have been reading loved for what they were, and we don't want these characters or this way of storytelling changed. So now you've literally gone and created a product for nobody? And the women who wanted to simply read what made comics good aren't happy with this mutilation either. These different types of comics, whether they're romance or hero, they've always had their target audience, and what's happening now is these third wave feminist writers are obliterating the fact that these target audiences existed, and these are the people that buy the comics. Yes, there's crossover. Some men will still read stories targeted towards women, and women will read stories that are targeted towards men, but the reason why those particular men and women read those comics are because the way they're already written, and by changing them, you're leaving these genres with no audience because you're trying to write them so they're for everyone. They were never meant to be for everyone. They were meant for specific audiences. Heading back to the article, though, it says, returning to the present, Dixon then noted that over the years, the industry had totally abandoned that female market, and now they don't know how to get it back. I mean, yeah, they did abandon the content that was specifically targeting female comic fans, the more drama-filled books like Archie and romance stuff, and instead, they wanted to get females to read the comics that were being targeted towards males originally by mutilating those stories and taking themes that were originally targeted towards women in the books they abandoned and put them in the books that were targeting men, thinking women would, start reading the superhero comics in droves, and that never happened because the women who were reading the superhero comics were reading them because of what they were. We never wanted them changed. They just simply do not understand that. And look at me, when I was younger, I used to absolutely love Marvel, I used to love DC because of what the products were, not what they could have been. I never looked at, an Iron Man comic and went, how could this be torn apart, and how could this be targeted towards me more? What would make me like this story more? Because that just wasn't a thing. I wanted to read the comics because I really enjoyed what they were and who the characters were, not because someone edited it and said, well, women would like this more if this character was slightly different or if they did this differently. Look, there needs to be different genres that target different audiences, and it is perfectly okay if sometimes readers overlap, but there does need to be a clear distinction, and we need to go back to writing different comics for different target audiences. And let's be clear, superhero comics are for boys, and I have no shame in admitting that as a woman. Stop taking popular themes for females and stuffing them into male-centric products. It doesn't sell, and people like me that love those superhero comics love them because of what they were and the way they were. And if I wanted these, female-themed comic books, I would go and I would purchase them. And I just think that unfortunately we have seen so much of a decline in comics over the recent years because of, yes, these people, these third wave feminists who don't understand that third wave feminist stories aren't going to bring girls back. They're not going to bring readers like me in droves because we just want to read good, engaging stories with awesome characters, and that's just not what they are doing. They are not capable of writing these stories anymore. I always say it, it's unfortunate that the comic industry is the way that it is, but instead of supporting the mainstream, you can support so many indie creators who do understand their audiences and are not afraid to embrace these groups of people and the stories that ultimately we all want. But that's all that I really had to discuss in this video. Let everyone know your thoughts in the comment section down below. If you enjoyed this and of course found it important and informative, make sure to give it a like, share it, and subscribe to the channel. And of course, if you didn't, make sure to give it a dislike. I appreciate your support either way, but I will talk to you all again in the next video really soon.